What begins as a routine night in the ER takes a shocking turn when a former combat medic turned nurse discovers a cryptic symbol tied to his military past. As Logan Carter dives into a dangerous conspiracy, will his courage uncover the truth or put everything he loves at risk? Subscribe to follow his journey and let us know in the comments where you're watching from as we honor veterans like Logan who stand up for justice. The sharp trill of an incoming trauma alert pierced the controlled chaos of the ER. Logan Carter, now a seasoned nurse, moved with the precision of someone who had long ago traded panic for purpose. His boots, a pair he had stubbornly kept from his deployment days, thudded against the linoleum as he crossed to the trauma bay. Male, early 20s, found unconscious in an alley, no ID, the paramedic reported as they wheeled in the gurney. Possible head injury and intoxication. Found this on his arm, thought it might mean something. The paramedic's voice was matter-of-fact, but Logan's eyes were already fixed on the arm in question. There, barely visible under the harsh fluorescence, was a tattoo. At first glance it seemed like an abstract pattern, but Logan recognized the edges of something else, a symbol that hadn't crossed his mind in years. It was a small, circular emblem with intersecting lines that reminded him of his time in the desert, where shadows stretched long and every mark had meaning. He blinked hard, shaking the memory free as Dr. Patel, the attending physician, took over. "Let's stabilize him. Logan, run a full tox screen and call radiology for a CT. We need to rule out a bleed." "Yes, doctor," Logan replied automatically, his gaze lingering on the tattoo as the team worked to transfer the patient. The young man's lips moved, barely audible. Logan leaned in. "Dust," the patient murmured. "Always the dust." Logan froze. The words were innocuous to anyone else, but they sent a cold spike through his spine. Dust. He had heard it in a different context before, whispered in the back rooms of Kabul, spoken by locals as a warning. A code word for something dangerous, something unseen but ever-present. "Logan, you good?" Sarah, one of the newer nurses, nudged him with a tray of supplies. "Yeah, I'm good," he said, forcing himself to focus. "Let's get started." But he wasn't good. He couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the back of his mind. As they worked, he couldn't stop glancing at the tattoo. It wasn't exactly the same as the ones he had seen on confiscated notebooks during raids, but it was close enough to light a fire in his memory. The patient's vitals stabilized, and radiology arrived to wheel him off for scans. Logan stepped back, peeling off his gloves and mask. He could hear the hum of monitors, the distant chatter of patients, but his mind was elsewhere. He stood, frozen for a moment, staring after the patient as if the answers to all his questions lay just beyond the trauma bay doors. "Logan, you look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah said, her tone light but concerned. "Just tired," Logan muttered, not meeting her gaze. "Long shift." Sarah shrugged and returned to charting. Logan headed to the break room, his mind racing. He had spent years burying the memories of his combat medic days spent patching up soldiers while keeping an ear out for insurgent whispers, but tonight they came flooding back. That symbol, those words, it all felt too familiar, too deliberate. He pulled out his phone and searched for circular tattoo with intersecting lines, hoping for a benign explanation. The results were frustratingly vague. Occult symbols, biker gang marks, geometric designs. Nothing tied it to what he feared. But Logan wasn't the type to dismiss his gut, and his gut was screaming that something was wrong. Hours later, as the shift wound down, Logan found himself at the patient's bedside. The scans had come back clear, and the tox screen confirmed high levels of alcohol. The patient's vitals were stable, but he remained unconscious. Logan's eyes drifted back to the tattoo, his hand instinctively hovering over the edge of the blanket. "Dust." The word echoed in his mind again, mingling with fragments of whispered warnings in cramped Afghan tents. "Always the dust." "Can I help you, Nurse Carter?" A voice startled him. Logan turned to see Dr. Patel, clipboard in hand and an eyebrow raised. "Just checking on him," Logan said, stepping back. "Everything looks good." He sighed. Patel nodded but didn't move. "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" Logan hesitated. He could bring up the tattoo, but what would he say? That it reminded him of an old military op? That it might mean nothing or everything? He settled for a half-truth. "Just something about this case sticks with me," he said. "Trauma cases often do," Patel replied, her tone kind. "Go home, Logan. You've done enough for tonight." Logan nodded, but as he walked to the locker room, he knew he wouldn't find peace in sleep. Something about that tattoo was wrong, and if he didn't figure out what, it would haunt him far worse than any memory ever had. Logan Carter sat at the worn kitchen table in his small apartment, the glow of his laptop illuminating the darkness around him. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of the wind outside. He hadn't even changed out of his scrubs, too focused on finding answers. The tattoo, the patient's mutterings, the eerie familiarity. It all churned in his mind like a storm he couldn't outrun. He typed intersecting circle tattoo military into the search bar for the third time that night, hoping for a different result. The same frustratingly vague answers appeared. Geometric designs, tribal patterns, occult imagery. But one link caught his eye this time. An obscure forum post from years ago. The title read, "Symbols in the Dust, Patterns Found in Conflict Zones." His pulse quickened as he clicked. The thread was filled with posts from veterans and researchers discussing symbols found in insurgent hideouts. As he scrolled, a photo stopped him cold. It wasn't identical to the one on the patient's arm, but it was close. Too close. The poster claimed the symbol was part of an underground network used for covert communication. It allegedly identified members of a group that trafficked not just drugs, but information. Messages coded into seemingly harmless tattoos and graffiti. Logan stared at the screen, his breath shallow. He remembered seeing the similar mark once, carved into the wooden beam of a dilapidated house in Helmand Province. It had been dismissed by his unit as local graffiti, but now he wasn't so sure. A sharp knock at the door shattered his thoughts. Logan flinched, his hand instinctively reaching for the kitchen drawer where he kept a small knife. He crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Relief washed over him when he saw Rachel Keller, his neighbor and a fellow veteran, standing there with her arms crossed. He opened the door and Rachel walked in without waiting for an invitation. "You look like hell," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. "Thanks for the pep talk," Logan muttered, shutting the door behind her. Rachel narrowed her eyes, her no-nonsense demeanor cutting through his fatigue. "What's going on?" "I saw your lights on all night. You don't strike me as the insomniac type." Logan hesitated but decided he could trust her. They had served together in the same theater, though in different roles, him as a medic, her as an intelligence officer. If anyone could help him piece this puzzle together, it was Rachel. "I saw something at work tonight," he said, sitting back at the table. He gestured to his laptop. "A patient came in with a tattoo. It looked like something I saw back in Afghanistan." Rachel leaned over the screen, her sharp green eyes scanning the image. "Where did you find this?" "An old vet forum," Logan replied. "It's tied to some kind of network, maybe a gang, maybe something bigger. It's been nagging at me since I saw it." Rachel sat down across from him, her expression unreadable. "You think it's connected to something criminal?" she asked. "No." Logan nodded. The patient muttered something about dust. "It's the same word locals used back in the sandbox. Code for trouble. Drugs, insurgents, you name it." Rachel frowned. "And you're sure it's not just a coincidence?" "Coincidence doesn't send shivers down your spine," Logan said, his voice low. You know what I mean. Logan's smile pointed. Come, go seat them. Here, Chloe. Rachel sighed, running a hand through her short-cropped hair. Okay, let's assume you're right. What do you want to do about it? Logan hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know. He had left the military to escape the endless cycle of danger and uncertainty. Civilian life was supposed to be simpler, but now he was staring at the edge of a cliff, knowing he might have to jump. I need to know what I'm dealing with, he finally said. Before I take it to anyone, I need proof. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. I'll help you, but you'd better be sure about this. You dig too deep, and someone's bound to notice. Logan nodded. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure. Rachel pulled out her phone. I still have contacts. If this symbol is tied to anything, I'll find out. The screen appeared to be a blur. Logan felt a flicker of hope. Thanks, Rachel. Don't thank me yet, she said, her tone grave. We might not like what we find. The next morning, Logan returned to the hospital, his mind still racing. The patient had been transferred to a general ward, and Logan seized the chance to check on him. The young man's condition had improved, but he was still groggy. As Logan adjusted his IV, the patient opened his eyes, his voice barely audible. They're coming. It was good? As good as... Logan's blood ran cold. Who's coming? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The patient's gaze flickered, unfocused. The ones who watch. They always watch. Before Logan could press further, the man slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Logan with more questions than answers. One was clear. This was no coincidence. Logan Carter sat at the back of the dimly lit room, his arms crossed as he listened to the muffled hum of conversation. The walls of the Veterans Support Group meeting were adorned with photos of soldiers in uniform, yellowing newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn posters thanking service members. It was a room designed to feel safe, a sanctuary for those who had carried the weight of duty and survived the scars it left behind. But tonight, safety felt like a luxury Logan couldn't afford, and he was hankering for a drink. Rachel Keller stood at the front of the room, speaking with her usual commanding presence. The group had been her idea, a way to give veterans a place to share their struggles. Logan admired her leadership, but he wasn't here for moral support tonight. He was here because she'd promised answers. As the meeting wrapped up, Rachel gave him a sharp nod, signaling him to stay behind. One by one, the others filed out, offering Logan the kind of smiles and pats on the shoulder that spoke of shared, unspoken understanding. When the last veteran left, Rachel shut the door, her expression grim. I've got something, she said, dropping a manila folder onto the table in front of Logan. But you're not going to like it. Logan picked up his folder. Logan opened the folder, his jaw tightening as he flipped through the pages. Photographs of symbols, similar to the one he had seen on the patient's arm, stared back at him. There were images of graffiti scrawled on alley walls, patches stitched onto jackets, even a crate marked with the emblem. A network of connections, seemingly random, stretched across the pages. This goes deeper than I thought, Logan muttered, more to himself than to Rachel. Rachel leaned against the table, arms crossed. That symbol? It's been popping up in law enforcement intel for the past few years. It's tied to a group calling themselves the Ash Circle. Supposedly they're a front for laundering money. Big money. Drugs, arms, even human trafficking. Logan's stomach churned. And the patient in my ER? You think he's part of it? Right. Not likely, Rachel replied. More like a pawn. The Ash Circle doesn't put their name on just anyone. If he's marked, he's either a courier or a scapegoat. Either way, he's expendable. Logan's mind raced. The young man's cryptic warnings, the eerie familiarity of the symbol. It was all starting to make sense. He said something about people watching him. Could the Ash Circle be after him? Except for a small number of witches in the neighborhood, it's not usually like that, Logan said, leaning his head back and examining his thoughts. Rachel's expression hardened. If he's talking, they will be. People who cross the Ash Circle don't usually live to tell about it. Logan's fists clenched. We need to protect him. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? If you get involved, you're painting a target on your back. And not just for them. This isn't some rogue gang. They've got connections in high places. Police, politicians, maybe even the hospital. Logan's jaw tightened. I can't just let it go, Rachel. This kid is in over his head. And if what you're saying is true, he might be the only lead we have to take these people down. Rachel sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You're as stubborn as ever, you know that? Who's talking? Logan shot back with a faint smirk. Rachel relented, pulling out her phone. Fine. I'll reach out to a few more contacts, see if I can get anything concrete. But you need to be careful, Logan. This isn't a fight you can patch up with a medkit. Logan nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. He had spent years stitching wounds, stabilizing broken bodies, and holding lives together. But this felt different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. Later that night, Logan returned to the hospital. His shift had ended hours ago, but he couldn't shake the sense of urgency. The patient, still listed as John Doe, was in a private room now, recovering under observation. Logan found him sitting up in bed, his face pale but his eyes sharper than before. You're back, the young man said, his voice hoarse. Logan stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I need answers, he said, his tone firm but calm. That tattoo on your arm, what does it mean? The man's gaze darted to the door, then back to Logan. He hesitated, his throat working as he swallowed hard. I can't. You can, Logan pressed. You're safe here. The young man let out a bitter laugh. Safe? You don't know who you're dealing with, replied Ethan. Coulson laughed. I know more than you think, Logan countered, pulling up a chair. I've seen that symbol before. Overseas. I know what it's tied to. The man's eyes widened slightly. Then you know they don't forgive. If they think I talked to you... His voice trailed off, his hands trembling. Logan leaned forward. If we don't stop them, they'll keep doing this. To you, to others. Help me, help you. For a long moment, the man said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. It's not just a symbol, he whispered. It's a code. They use it to mark their routes, their players. I was supposed to deliver something, money, I think, but I panicked. Tried to back out. Logan's pulse quickened. Who recruited you? The man's face twisted in fear. I don't know their names. Just a guy who said he had a way to pay off my debts. I didn't know what I was getting into. Logan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing now, but you need to trust me. I'll keep you safe. As Logan left the room, his mind was made up. He wasn't just fighting for this man's life. He was taking a stand against the shadows that threatened them both. Logan sat in his truck, parked on a dimly lit street outside a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town. The GPS on his phone had led him here, its screen now dark on the passenger seat. This was the address Rachel had traced from her contacts, an unregistered property tied to a shell company linked to the Ash Circle. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he scanned the scene. The building loomed large in the night, its corrugated metal walls rusted and pockmarked. A faint light glowed from a window on the second floor, and the faint hum of machinery buzzed in the still air. Logan wasn't sure what he expected to find, but his instincts screamed danger. A knock on the passenger window startled him, and his hand reflexively moved toward the knife in his jacket. But when he turned, he saw Rachel standing there, her expression both tense and impatient. He unlocked the door and she slid in, carrying a small duffel bag. "You look like hell," she said, her tone flat but not unkind. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Logan muttered, rubbing his temples. "You didn't have to come." "You're right, I didn't," Rachel replied, unzipping the bag. Inside were a flashlight, a compact first aid kit, and a sleek black pistol. She handed the flashlight to Logan, but kept the pistol for herself. "But someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Logan gave her a dry look. "I'm touched. Save the sarcasm. What's the plan?" He took a deep breath, his eyes flicking to the warehouse again. "We go in, see what's inside, and get out. Quiet and fast. If we find anything solid, we call it in. This is a place she can't seem to keep us." "And if we don't make it out quiet and fast?" Rachel asked, arching an eyebrow. "And we improvise." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Great. I feel so reassured." They slipped out of the truck and moved toward the warehouse, sticking to the shadows. Logan's heart pounded with each step, but his training took over, sharpening his senses. The air smelled of oil and mildew, and the faint crunch of gravel beneath their boots was the only sound. When they reached the side of the building, Rachel gestured toward a narrow door with a padlock. Logan knelt, inspecting the lock. "Cheap," he muttered, pulling a small set of tools from his pocket. In seconds the lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. The interior was worse than Logan expected. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the darkness, covered in dust and cluttered with boxes marked with cryptic codes. The air was thick with the stench of chemicals, and a faint, rhythmic clanking echoed from deeper within the building. Rachel scanned the area with her flashlight, her grip firm on the pistol. "This doesn't look like a storage facility. It's too disorganized." Logan nodded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a table in the corner piled with papers. "Over there." They moved cautiously, the sound of their footsteps muffled on the concrete floor. Logan reached the table first, rifling through the papers. Most were invoices and manifests, but one sheet caught his attention. A diagram of the symbol he had seen on the patient's arm, with annotations in a language he couldn't read. Rachel leaned over his shoulder. "That's Farsi," she said, her voice low. "It's a code. These notes are about routes and shipments. This place isn't just a front. It's a hub." Before Logan could respond, the clanking sound grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices. They exchanged a tense glance, both instinctively ducking behind the shelves. Two men entered the warehouse, their silhouettes sharp in the harsh light from the doorway. Both were dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by baseball caps. One carried a clipboard, the other a large duffel bag. "They're restocking," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Logan's jaw clenched. They couldn't leave now, not without knowing what was in the bag. But as the men approached the shelves, Logan's foot brushed against a loose wrench, sending it clattering to the floor. The sound was deafening in the quiet warehouse. The men froze, their heads snapping toward the noise. "Pressure." "Who's there?" one of them barked, pulling a handgun from his waistband. Rachel mouthed a curse and gestured for Logan to move. They darted deeper into the shadows, weaving through the shelves as the men shouted and split up to search. Logan's pulse thundered in his ears as he and Rachel crouched behind a stack of crates. He could hear the men's footsteps getting closer, their flashlights sweeping the aisles. Rachel held up 3 fingers, silently counting down. On one, she bolted from cover, her pistol aimed at the nearest man. "Drop it!" she shouted, her voice echoing. The man hesitated, his flashlight wobbling, but before he could react, Logan tackled him from the side, knocking the gun from his hand. The second man raised his weapon, but Rachel fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the metal shelving, sending him scrambling for cover. "Time to go!" Rachel yelled, pulling Logan to his feet. They sprinted for the exit, the men's shouts and gunfire following them. Logan's shoulders slammed into the door, forcing it open, and they tumbled out into the night. Behind them, the warehouse erupted in chaos. the sound of alarms blaring as more voices joined the fray. Back in the truck, Logan floored the gas, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rachel sat beside him, clutching the diagram they had found. "Too close," she said, her breath ragged. "But worth it," Logan replied, glancing at her. "We've got proof now. Enough to blow this wide open." Rachel nodded, but her expression remained grim. "Let's hope it's enough, because after tonight, they'll know we're coming." Logan's jaw tightened. "Good. Let them know." The hospital boardroom was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos of the emergency department Logan Carter usually navigated. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting pale streaks on the polished oak table. Logan sat stiffly in one of the leather chairs, his jaw clenched and his fists resting on the documents in front of him. Across from him sat Martin Ellis, the hospital's chief financial officer, a man whose pressed stoop and calmed the lawyer in the waiting room mess swept up through him. To Logan's left was Rachel Keller, her expression unreadable but her body language radiating tension. She'd insisted on coming, though she had no official ties to the hospital. To Logan's right, Dr. Patel sat with her arms crossed, a skeptical eyebrow raised as she glanced between Logan and Ellis. "Mr. Carter," Ellis began, his tone cool and controlled, "you've accused a member of this hospital's board of having ties to organized crime. These are serious allegations. I hope you have evidence to back them up." Logan slid a folder across the table. "It's all in there," he said, his voice steady. "Financial records, shipments tied to this facility, and that symbol. Right there on the crates stored in the warehouse we found." Ellis flipped open the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. He showed no reaction, but his grip on the pages tightened ever so slightly. "And you claim this Ash Circle is using our hospital to launder money?" "Not just money," Rachel interjected. "They're moving drugs and illegal goods under the guise of medical supplies. We traced multiple shipments to the hospital's procurement department." Patel leaned forward, her skeptical expression giving way to concern. "How is that even possible? We have strict protocols." Rachel tapped the folder. "Not strict enough. Someone inside is bypassing your protocols, falsifying purchase orders, and using legitimate shipments to cover illegal ones." Ellis set the folder down with a sigh, his expression calculated. "This is quite the story. But even if these documents are legitimate, they don't prove anyone here is involved." Logan met his gaze head-on. "The patient with the tattoo, the one who came into my ER, mentioned your name." Ellis stiffened, the first crack in his composure. "That's absurd. You're a well-known researcher specializing in drug resistance," Bowen said. "Is it?" Logan pressed. "We've been following the trail for weeks. All signs point back to you." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Ellis's calm facade wavered, and a flicker of anger crossed his face. He turned to Patel. "You're seriously entertaining this? A wild theory based on a tattoo and some suspicious paperwork?" "This is a military tattoo." Patel hesitated, but before she could respond, Rachel spoke again. "It's not just paperwork. We have audio recordings from the warehouse, conversations about hospital connections and shipments. Want to guess whose name came up?" Ellis's face darkened, his veneer of professionalism crumbling. "You're making a mistake." Logan leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "The only mistake was underestimating how far I'd go to protect this hospital. You've been using it as a front, putting lives at risk for profit." Ellis stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This meeting is over." Before he could leave, the door opened, and two men in suits entered. They flashed badges. "Martin Ellis," one of them said. "We're with the Department of Justice. You're under investigation for conspiracy, money laundering, and organized crime." Ellis froze, his face pale. "You can't be serious." Signs of confusion appeared in the man's closely gathered eye. One of the agents stepped forward. "We have a warrant to seize your office records and all relevant materials. Please cooperate." Ellis's composure shattered. "This is ridiculous. You don't have proof? Rachel crossed her arms. We handed it to them an hour ago. Logan watched as Ellis was escorted out, the room falling into a stunned silence. Patel turned to Logan, her expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. I had no idea. You weren't supposed to, Logan said, his voice softening. That's how they operate, quiet, in the shadows. But it's over now. Patel nodded slowly. Thank you, Logan. You may have saved this hospital. Hours later, Logan stood outside the hospital, the crisp evening air a welcome relief after the stifling tension of the boardroom. Rachel joined him, her hands shoved into her jacket pockets. You okay? She asked. Logan nodded, though his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. I didn't think it would go this far, but I'm glad we got him. Rachel smirked. You're not bad at this whole detective thing. He chuckled softly. Don't count on me making it a career. I've had enough excitement for a lifetime. Rachel's expression turned serious. You did good today, Logan. Not just for the hospital, but for that kid in your ER. You gave him a fighting chance. Logan's gaze drifted toward the entrance, where patients and staff moved in and out. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but a battle had been won, and for now, that was enough. The courtroom buzzed with muted conversations, the weight of anticipation palpable in the air. Logan Carter sat in the back row, dressed in a modest suit that felt foreign compared to his usual scrubs. To his left, Rachel Keller leaned forward, her sharp gaze locked on the front of the room where the judge was seated. The Ash Circle's trial had finally come to this, a day of reckoning that Logan had both dreaded and longed for. The young patient, now identified as Nathan Reyes, had testified earlier that morning. Logan had watched the fragile man recount his entanglement with the Ash Circle, a mixture of desperation and coercion that had led to his role as a courier. The bravery it took for Nathan to speak up struck a chord in Logan. He remembered his trembling form in the hospital bed, broken but not beyond repair. Today, Nathan stood taller, his voice shaking but resolute as he described the network that had exploited him. Logan's thoughts were interrupted as the judge addressed the courtroom. The evidence presented, she began, has shown a clear and deliberate pattern of criminal activity orchestrated by the defendants. Martin Ellis sat at the defense table, his polished exterior now worn and frayed. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Ellis stared straight ahead, his expression a mix of defiance and resignation. The symbol, the cursed mark, that had brought all of this to light was visible on several pieces of evidence displayed during the trial. It was no longer a shadowy emblem whispered about in dark alleys, but a symbol of betrayal and corruption, laid bare in the light of justice. The judge's voice continued, firm and unwavering. Mr. Ellis, you and your associates manipulated trust, jeopardized public safety, and caused immeasurable harm. This court finds you guilty of conspiracy, money laundering, and aiding organized crime. The gavel struck, and a collective exhale swept through the room. Logan felt the tension drain from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet relief. Justice had been served. The Ash Circle's grip on the hospital and the community was broken. As the courtroom emptied, Rachel nudged Logan with her elbow. "You did it," she said, a rare smile breaking through her usually serious demeanor. "We did it," Logan corrected, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Couldn't have done it without you." Later that evening, Logan found himself back at the hospital, not as a nurse on duty, but as a man seeking closure. The ER was quieter than usual, the hum of monitors and distant footsteps a comforting backdrop. He made his way to Nathan's room, where the young man was packing his belongings. Nathan looked up as Logan entered, a smile breaking across his face. "Hey, I was hoping I'd see you." Logan returned the smile, leaning against the door frame. "Thought I'd check in before you left." Nathan nodded, his movements slower than they should have been for a man his age, but determined nonetheless. "They're moving me to a rehab program. Said it'll help me get back on my feet." "It will," Logan said. "You're doing the right thing." Nathan hesitated, his hand stilling on the bag he was packing. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. I thought it was over for me. But you didn't give up." Logan's throat tightened. He had seen so many patients come and go, but Nathan's words reminded him why he had chosen this path. "You were worth fighting for," he said simply. Nathan's eyes glistened, but he quickly blinked the tears away. "Thanks, Logan. For everything." As Logan left the hospital, he paused in the parking lot, his gaze lifting to the stars scattered across the night sky. The battles he fought in Afghanistan had been different from the ones he faced now, but the scars they left felt eerily similar. Yet, tonight, for the first time in years, he felt lighter. Rachel's car pulled up beside him, her window rolling down. "Need a ride?" Logan shook his head. "Nah, I think I'll walk for a bit." Rachel nodded, her gaze lingering on him. "You know, you could have let this go. No one would have blamed you." Logan smiled faintly. "That's not who I am." Rachel chuckled softly. "No, it's not. Take care, Logan." He watched her drive off before starting down the street, his footsteps steady and unhurried. The cool air brushed against his skin, carrying with it the faint scent of possibility. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this: he'd continue to stand for what was right, no matter the cost. And as the hospital's lights faded behind him, Logan Carter felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace.